Welcome to Foresight TV, where we provide leadership food for the soul, helping senior living organizations have higher occupancy, lower turnover, and better cultures. Today's episode is made possible through the generous support of Connected Living, a technology company that helps senior living communities effectively communicate with residents, families, and team members. Here's today's show. Bob, Ryan, I am so excited about this. We started talking about this episode of Senior Living Foresight on social media earlier this week, and there have been so many people who have commented about how excited they are to hear what you have to say. You are both amazing thought leaders in the senior living space. Bob, people are still talking about the presentation you did at the Our Time to Shine Summit. And so with that, I'm going to actually step off the screen and I'll let you both, you probably don't really need introductions, but I'm going to let you both introduce yourself and sit back and enjoy the conversation with everybody else.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Steve. Ryan and I both are thrilled to be with you, with your audience today. Again, I'm Bob Kramer. I co-founded and served as CEO for many years until 2017 of NIC, now serve them as a strategic advisor. In the midst of the pandemic last spring, I founded Nexus Insights, which is a thought leadership platform with a group of us, of whom Ryan is one of the fellows. And our focus is really to help leaders think, what does it mean to truly disrupt not just aging services, but more broadly, how we think about aging, how we think about older adults, how we therefore think about housing and health and different issues. And we're operating really at both ends of the spectrum, so to speak, both those that are older and most in need of care and services, and those that are younger and trying to make decisions about lifestyle and health and place. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And so with that, before I go any further, let me just turn it over to Ryan to briefly introduce himself, and then I'm going to give a little bit more background on him. So Ryan?
Yeah, Bob, thank you. It's great to be here. Bob, you've been a mentor of mine for a long time, as we were talking about a week or so ago. I've known Bob since the summer of 2004, where I was a summer intern between years in business school working with Sunrise. So it's been it's great to be here today, but more importantly, it's a key juncture in the story of our industry and frankly, just the impact of millions of lives here as we all look to get the benefit of this longevity bonus, which we'll spend some time talking about. So just excited to be here, Bob, and the dialogue.
Great. Well, as you said, Ryan, we first met that summer of 2004 when you were doing that internship and also spending much of the time living, I think, in Atlanta in a Sunrise community. And your sort of first introduction to the space. And you went on to work on the private equity side in terms of investing in our industry, then served with a major operator, Erickson Senior Living, as an executive there. And have since gone on to do a number of things, some of which we're going to talk about. But you founded, serve as CEO of SmartLiving 360, and through that platform, you're really helping folks, quite frankly, my age, think about what we want in terms of place where to live, and particularly community, and what kind of place and community engagement is going to help us in terms of our health. And you don't just simply talk about, you've really tried to implement some of the things that you talk about with the stories in Rockville, Maryland, which was a multi-generational housing setting that was designed to do a number of sort of leading edge things in terms of thinking again about integration of place and housing and community and lifestyle and health. So with all that, though, I know a background where I didn't know you prior to business school at Stanford, you were involved with some startups. You were in Silicon Valley. What caused you to sort of leave the startup world, the Silicon Valley, and decide to do an internship in senior living, and then to devote, the last 15 plus years of your life in one way or another, very much in this sector?
Yeah, Bob. Well, from time to time, I blame you for part of that. No, I mean, it's fascinating when you think about today how much the larger technology companies are dominating our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and the role that's outsized role that Silicon Valley has had. For me, and I know many of us in our field, we had some experience growing up that influenced our thinking and heart towards older adults, but even just this idea of living longer. And so I was close to my grandparents. I was involved, a sixth grade teacher. She helped take our class. We used recorders, and we were teamed up with people in a local assisted living community. My partner was Melba Rollins, who was there, who was blind. Got to know her really well, but otherwise, she was healthy other than her visual impairment. And we got to know each other pretty well over a 3-year stretch. And it really started from there, I think. And then later on in business school, I just took a step back after the fast-paced technology, rocket ship environment, and said, where is there less innovation and happening, and where can you really make an impact on people's lives? And business school allows you to take a step back, and I took advantage of that, and that's when I reached out to, I didn't know anyone, but reached out to people in senior housing, and Paul Clausen was fortunate enough to respond, and then accommodating for me to live in a community for the better part of a month. My wife would join me for that segment, but then meeting you and others influenced me. There's really an opportunity to get involved, and fortunately over the years, more and more people with backgrounds like myself, innovators, have come in. Mm-hmm. And have added to our field. So it's been a long journey, a longer one still for sure. And in many ways, the most exciting times are ahead.
Well, even in what you just said, you said that you saw a real opportunity in this space for what I'll call disruptive innovation, and that attracted you. There was a lot that was going to need to be done. And increasingly recently, you've spoken and written about the importance of place. So help me to sort of understand. Okay, you got into senior living. You're passionate about not the field and the opportunity, but you're also seeing a real need for change. And then you go from there to really focusing in on this topic of place. Why is place so important?
Yeah, great question. One observation on the innovation side, when I was at Sunrise, and it was at a better stage for the company. There's been some harder times at stages, but it was a good time for the company. But it was heavily reliant upon voicemail, and so you didn't really use email much. And coming from more dynamic business school in Silicon Valley, the idea of leaving voicemails for everyone was a bit antiquated. So it was a reminder in certain ways how just the field opportunities to innovate. The place that I came into this field despite real estate. I just saw it as an environment where you could positively influence people. The journey, though, has educated me in so many different ways, but one of which is how significant place is. Mm-hmm. And on that journey, one of the things I've been thinking a lot more, and for sure many of us, has been, sure, there's a loyalty to our field, but ultimately it's an indirect way to influence people's lives. Mm-hmm. And I think this pandemic, which we'll get to in a second, but generally speaking, just place has an enormous impact. And when we look at the drivers behind longevity, it's much more around lifestyle than it is DNA. Mm-hmm. And so where can you be in places where you have greater purpose? Things, Bob, you've talked about in terms of really having that ability to thrive and passion and energy going forward. So where can you get greater purpose? Where can you be socially connected? Time right now where we're struggling with so much physical isolation, loneliness. Where are you more likely to be physically active? Where are you making good financial decisions? It turns out place has a very significant factor in many of these lifestyle factors, both directly and indirectly. And
If we can, let's relate that specifically to the coronavirus. In other words, in your view, has that diminished or increased the importance of place? And specifically, how about for older adults and especially boomers? How has the coronavirus impacted their thinking or lack thereof about place?
Well, I think, Bob, you and I think a lot about the future in general, but specifically as it relates to longevity. Not as many people think quite as much about this on a day-to-day basis. And I think with the coronavirus, the pandemic, it's forced this issue upon people. Mm-hmm. It's not a marginal change, it's enormous change, because people are now recognizing through some of their peer groups, what they see in the news and so on, that that where you live makes a dramatic impact, on your life. I mean, sadly, we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives that are linked to the impact of place. I think correspondingly, it's made many people take a step back and say, am I in the right geography? Am I in the right metro area? Am I in the right neighborhood? And then you start to get into specific, like, physical dwellings. Am I in a single family or home the right thing for me? Is there a place for greater community? Is senior living the right spot? I think people are coming to different answers on some of this, but I think the number of questions people are thinking about is much greater, and therefore even in our industry, it has implications in terms of how our industry has to relate to this thinking that boomers are going through right now.
Well, you've somewhat answered it, but I see a question already in the chat, just wanting to understand how you're defining place. I think you're defining it very broadly, but just one of our listeners is saying, what do you mean by place?
Yeah. So we have a tendency sometimes to think too narrowly about place and home. It's your physical dwelling. It's your house. But in reality, there's a number of different levels, because your place is a function of what region or state or metropolitan area you're in. There's cultural dimensions to where that fits in. It's place it ties into neighborhood, because some neighborhoods lend themselves to knowing your neighbor, others don't. Some are more easily accessible to walk around, others aren't. And then you can focus on your specific physical dwelling, whether it's a single family home, whether it's an apartment, whether you're part of a co-op, whether it's senior living, whether you're an accessible dwelling unit. It's that composite together. And I would be, I think it's also important to say that home itself is an emotion that people have, and that too ties to it. So it's multifaceted, and that's how we need to think about it.
Well, you've gotten so engaged, if I can put it that way, with the concept and the importance of the concept of place, that now you've written about it. So why is that? What are you trying to accomplish through the book? And then I want to bring it back to also who the book is for.
Yeah.
Who are you targeting with this?
So we, as you mentioned in the beginning remarks, been thinking a lot about how can we create more options for people to thrive as they age. And in that journey led to this partnership with a public retail REIT called Federal Realty Investment Trust, and we built an intergenerational community outside of DC. And the idea was, how can we create normal apartments, but they're designed for people of all ages? And how can we do it in such a way that it's walkable to many as you might look for, and it has a DNA around community, and then technology and into the building and different service coordination, whether it's lifestyle or health. In that process, as we educated people why this was a great place to move into, some people got it initially. Didn't have to have another meeting. Some people, we were talking a foreign language around longevity. Why does place matter? And so, Bob, in that frontline effort, talking to prospects, in some cases residents, ultimately, it reminded me, educated me on how many people don't understand what the options are, and they don't understand the significance of the decision. And so that led to this process, which you're right, this fall I have a book coming out with Johns Hopkins Press called Right Place, Right Time, The Ultimate Guide to Choosing a Home for the Second Half of Life. And it helps people understand why place matters so much, and even the different dimensions we've already talked about in this conversation. But then what are the range of options? And it helps people understand the pros and cons of each, and the intent is to help give people more power, more information to make good decisions. And among the sections is senior living. It highlights why why that's valuable. Thank you for some of your comments in one of the early manuscripts. But we need to think about as an industry as well. So back to your question on consumers, it is for people that, frankly, I was on a call earlier today with someone in the early 50s. Once your kids are gone, you start to ask these set of questions around what do I want the rest of my life to look like? So it's targeting people, empty nesters, people 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, people closer to a senior living decision, and then their adult children that are trying, that want to make good decisions for their loved ones and families. And so it's a larger group, but a group that I found is largely uninformed to the degree that they can be to make good decisions.
So it is a book written for, if you want, the older consumer, as you said, and thinking about place for the second half of their life.
That's right.
Well, then I want to pivot now for the sort of second half of our discussion to then let's come back to the senior living industry. You've spent a lot of time in it. Now you've written a book that's really designed primarily for consumers to help equip them for the questions that you feel they ought to be asking and thinking about as they make decisions about place and where they're going to live. But where are we now, do you think, in the story of the senior living industry?
Yeah. So Bob, I don't know, you have quite an informed view on this as well, and I think it's critical when we have these stories because we hit different chapters, and it's important to understand where you've come from to understand where you may be headed. And I think we're in this broader, keep it brief, but this broader industry that in some ways the private pay side in particular, was really active in the 90s and early 2000s when I first got involved. And there's been, with your work and others, fortunately, a lot of capital and talent and that has come into the field. I think with the Great Recession, one of the things that happened was it pushed the field more towards this idea that it needed to be more of a need-based product. And it became more about providing services for your health condition. And I think that with the capital that came in and some of the impact of all of that, today the industry has been impacted by it feeling more and more as a healthcare product, as a needs-based product, and in the process, I think we've missed in some cases the whole person. And that whole person can be missed in independent living, it can be missed in assisted living, it can be missed in skilled nursing. But in general, I think for good reason, there's been a push to higher competencies on the healthcare side, and that's happened. There'll be even more, of course, on the other side of the pandemic related to infection control. And I think there's even been a push to how can we be better on the hospitality side. But some of those things don't necessarily help these fundamentals around successful aging. These really important, the formula that helps us where purpose is so important and social connection and physical activity and so on. I think some parts of senior living do that, or at least we talk about it. But I don't think we've really done an exceptional job of delivering a differentiated product and service that can instrumentally help people's lives for the better and make it compelling. Some of this happens, but a lot of times it can be much more significant. The story can be told better. So I'm optimistic that the next chapter coming out of the pandemic is going to be an opportunity for more groups to really think hard about how the value proposition can be so much better than it was before the pandemic.
Well, let's talk about value proposition specifically, because I've heard you speak about sort of the tenuous current value proposition. You referred to that as kind of reflecting reality, but with the higher acuity levels, frailty levels of residents when they were moving, even just when they were moving in, that more it was about a care model. And I think you've said such things, a care model that was focused on survival rather than a community model that was focused on thriving. So tell me some of your thoughts about, why you think the value proposition now may be tenuous and what the opportunity is in terms of a new, and the word you used, which I like, I use it all, a compelling value proposition.
Yeah. There's so many dimensions of this, Bob, that, in the strategy work with SmartLiving 360, the work that I do is with a number of large, like, health systems, some for-profit and not-for-profit senior living communities, life care communities, so a number of different investment groups, and so on. And you start to look at this from a bunch of different angles. Mm-hmm. And I would say one of the angles that is underappreciated when we look at the overall kind of composite of senior living as an owner, investor, provider, is around length of stay. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's happened is this move to a care-based model has made it such that people are coming in at a later and later stage, mm-hmm. where their healthcare needs are more and more prominent, mm-hmm. where that length of stay in large part it gets compressed. And when that happens, you're on this conveyor belt that's moving faster and faster. And so it might look good in a moment, but the next month could be that much harder because you've had unexpected people passing away or moving even to higher levels of care. And so you're in the situation where you feel this pressure for constant occupancy. Mm-hmm. And that happens in part because the rental model makes it a little bit harder, but it's more like, why are people moving in? Mm-hmm. And so when I say it's tenuous, it is if you're in a situation where the length of stay continues to get compressed, and there's less of a non-care reason for people to move in, and people's alternatives are better, which we'll get into, and your price point gets higher and higher because your cost to deliver care is higher, and so on. With technology and a bunch of things, it's just the delivery of care gets higher. Your market starts to get squeezed, mm-hmm. and you're working harder and harder for ultimately a lower and lower occupancy. It's a really hard model. And that's why you're seeing some substantial groups, some very sophisticated groups like HealthPeak, for example, make public announcements to exit the sector. And so I think as you look at that, it speaks to, wait a second, how can we do this in such a way that we can expand what's possible? Mm-hmm. And I think it goes back again to what we're saying around, we have so many people that are aging that have this opportunity to really thrive as they age. And this isn't just marketing speak. I mean, there's a study that's been done or been proved globally around the U-shaped happiness curve. Mm-hmm. I do a blog every month, a consumer blog. I talk about things like this, and this was one a year or so ago. And it doesn't jive necessarily with what we think about in the context of ageism. But the happiest people are the oldest people. In general, self-reported well-being, people in their like early 20s are at a certain level, and they go down to 30s, 40s, early 50s, and then you pick it up. And really in your 70s, 80s, your self-reported happiness is greater than at every point in life. So there's a really good story around that. But unless our field has an opportunity mm-hmm. to educate boomers around what this formula is for successful aging, mm-hmm. and then say, voila, we do it. Mm-hmm. Here are the things that we specifically do to help you understand purpose and for you and engage in it. And I know Chip Conley and others have done a good job to elevate its importance, but we have an environment, place can make that easier. And then with social connection, there's ways that people can find these meaningful connections, whether they're extroverts or not. We're at a stage where it used to be the main social connection for senior living was wearing a sport coat and coming in for the 3-hour dinner every night. That's not how we do it now. But there's ample opportunities to create these mechanisms virtually and in person for people to connect. And also, of course, with wellness and be physically active. There's so many different ways. Weightlifting is more important as you get older, right? I mean, how can we make that easier? And we're all influenced by our environment. So I think it's, Bob, I think there's this opportunity to make it compelling mm-hmm. by having a lot of the organizational weight, this alignment around who do we want to be as an organization, mm-hmm. and then how does our mission support what that vision is? How can a CEO cast that vision and then have it really cascade within the organization? So what is ultimately experienced by prospective and then current residents is consistent with what the vision is. And I know there's some organizations that are doing a good job in this area. I know there's some that cast a vision, but it doesn't really make its way down to lived experience. But if as a field, we could move that direction, it would be enormous. I mean, one of the things that hit me writing this book is I had to put myself in all, making the case for all these different environments. And it's not as simple, of course, as single family homes and senior living. There's all these different options, and more are happening almost by the day. And the pandemic's accelerated it, because if the idea was, well, if I had to live at home, where would I get service? Like, how could I get my groceries, or how can I get service delivered to me, or could I see my doctor? Well, check. All those things have happened virtually overnight. And so the alternative for people living in their homes, which of many people will continue to want to do, but you have to recognize it's in senior living, we're not living in our own world. There's the options for people is improving. It will continue to improve. And as you and I have talked about, it's difficult for us to fully gauge what that negative impact has been with the media. And you and I and those here listening and watching are experts on this. But for many people, skilled nursing gets conflated to senior living, the entire field. So the level of work that's going to need to be done to really show something special and different and makes your life better is going to be doubly important.
Well, if I could just sum up some of what you've just said, I think you're saying that the opportunity in terms of compelling value proposition is to move in terms of, it's not that we don't provide care, but to move from sort of the conveyor belt of a declinist model of aging, where we offer to be a way station as you decline and provide you great amenities and great care, but you're just the receiver, to the opportunity to have a positive engagement model of what we're providing. That's about, we're going to enable you, whatever your physical or cognitive limitations, to thrive. And part of that thriving is that connectedness, not just to people in the community, but connectedness outside the walls to the broader community. And so it's really the contrast between a declinist model of aging and an engagement model. Is that a fair sort of summary of it?
I think that's a good summary. I mean, I would add to it, though, Jill Vitale, awesome, one of the other Nexus Insights fellows, she wrote a book a year or so ago called Disrupting the Status Quo of Senior Living, a Mind Shift. And what she would say, not to speak for her, but I think what she would say is that there is engagement, but part of it is actually getting out of the way. It's giving people the tools to, like they always have, create their own adventure and have them become more citizens of the community they're part of. And this is why it's subtle but so significant. If part of the roots of senior living have come from the hospital industry and has been more institutionalized, and we're still trying to undo that. I know groups like the Eden Alternative and others are really working hard to deprogram how we've done it. Sometimes we think, well, geez, we'll just make it like a hospitality model where we serve people. And that's a step in the right direction, but I think that falls short.
Absolutely.
Of this level of engagement and empowerment. And so it's more, how can we, as a field, give people the tools for them to thrive, but in some ways get out of the way and allow this purpose-driven living that I think quite a number of people are looking for, but often hard to solve on their own, make it easier for that to happen.
Yeah. Getting out of the way, but that also includes taking advantage of technology to allow people to experience that connectedness.
Absolutely.
We're almost at the end of our time, but 1 minute, tell if you were an investor or a not-for-profit provider, what would you do today?
Well, I think, Bob, it starts with taking a step back and recognizing what has changed in our world. You and I and others in Nexus Insights have talked about how this pandemic's been an accelerant. And so this idea of, well, once people are vaccinated, we're just going to take a step back and it's going to go back to the way it was, that's foolhardy. So you need to take a moment to say, where do we really think the world's headed? Mm-hmm. And then what are the assets that we have as an organization or as an investor to put to work? And how can we create something that's truly differentiated and sustainable? I think that as I've raised some real flags around the care-based model and the challenges of this slower length of stay, I think that's only going to get harder and harder, particularly when you layer labor as part of it. So I think this is an opportune time for groups to step back, particularly visionary CEOs or people are really committed to doing this in a compelling way. And by the way, for not-for-profit providers, this is not, it's not a trade-off of mission or margin, it's both. Like if you're successful in this, you should be driving real impact on people's lives and have more sustainable margins and business models. So I think there are things but it does start with planning and taking a moment to say, where is this really headed, and investing in that.
Well, we're near the end of our time, but if you're interested in learning more for yourself or to help others about how they should be thinking about place, I encourage you to get in touch with Ryan at smartliving360.com and sign up for his blog, track when his book will come out, I think next fall. If you're interested even more broadly in thinking about what are the disruptive opportunities right now in the whole field of aging services, then I encourage you to also follow Nexus Insights. Ryan and I are both fellows. It's a great group. Many of the others mentioned, Jill Vitale-Olson, Bill Thomas, all fellows, David Grabowski. You can find us at nexusinsights.net. That's nexusinsights.net. And sign up and follow us. And with that, I want to thank Ryan. Thank you for your time and with us, your insights. Excited, looking forward to the book coming out. The title again that's coming out?
Right Place, Right Time.
Right Place, Right Time. Johns Hopkins Press, coming out next fall. And with that, I'll turn it back to the ultimate showmaster, Steve Moran. Steve?
Thank you, Bob. Ryan, this is amazing. They're two money shot things that you said that I made notes on. They'll probably turn into articles. One is that the idea that there's the story about the happiness curve, and that it's a great story, that we need to be telling that story and saying we do it, which of course means we actually have to do it, right? And then the other what's that?
Steve, the other piece with that is we need to realize the broader society needs the very strengths of coping, of going through times of challenges that seniors have. Seniors are not, again, they may be some of the greatest architects of helping us address some of the deficits that the pandemic and our political divisiveness and so forth have created. And so, as Ryan said, we got to stop thinking about seniors as just recipients. We've got to think about their role in helping us solve the problems we've got.
Absolutely. And then the other part I loved is this idea that senior living ought to be doing a create your own adventure. That's the senior living community that I want to go live in a few years. So
great.
Thank you very much. Wonderful content. And I just appreciate your wisdom and your thoughts. And next week, we actually want to talk about, just quickly before I say goodbye, about what's happening in the next 2 weeks. Next week, we're actually going to talk about senior living in Mexico, primarily for expats. Somebody who has been a friend for a long time, Wendy Carroll. She's an expert. She's lived down there. She knows the industry. Should be a fascinating conversation. Something operators ought to pay attention to. We did a story about 4 years ago on Mexico senior living. And in our organic search, it still puts that article that's 4 years old up top almost every single month when we look at our data. People are really interested in that. And then we're going to tackle, on the last Friday, we're going to tackle a very difficult topic. I'm a little nervous about it, frankly. We're going to talk about the low adoption rate for the vaccine in the African-American community. And so it'll be much like this one, where I'll introduce it and I'll step away and let you hear from who are really experts and talk about the history and why that's happening and how to make it better. So again, thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Appreciate it.